Abstraction. It is a word we use often but seldom stop to trace. What does it mean? Where did it come from? And why does it matter for how we read the scriptures? In the world of scholarship, an abstract is a summary, a condensed version of a larger work, highlighting the main points. It stands apart from the whole, offering a bird's-eye view. In thought itself, abstraction goes further. It is when we lift an idea away from its immediate soil, when something tangible, earthy, and embodied becomes detached, generalized, and set in the realm of concepts. Abstraction is what happens when you stop talking about a stone under your foot and instead begin to speak of hardness in itself. When you stop speaking of a flowing river and instead talk of motion as a universal principle. It is the human mind stepping back, seeking to name not only the thing, but the idea behind the thing. Every culture has some measure of abstraction. It is part of human language. But cultures do not all use it the same way. For the Hebrews, thought remained bound to the earth. Their words grew out of soil, stone, wind, and covenant practice. Truth was something hammered into the wall like a peg. Glory was the heaviness you could feel when a great one entered the tent. Righteousness was a path beneath your feet or a set of scales that did not tip unfairly. Spirit was the breath in your lungs or the desert wind rushing through the encampment. Wisdom was not a theory. It was the practiced skill of a craftsman's hands or the experience of a sailor who knew how to read the winds. The Hebrew route to meaning was concrete. It walked a path of images. It spoke in verbs, in actions, in story. It tied truth to life. The Greeks, by contrast, leaned heavily into abstraction, especially after the time of Plato and Aristotle. They were not content with pictures of firmness or heaviness or straightness. They wanted to know, what is truth itself? What is justice as a category? What is spirit as an essence? Their route to meaning was different. It climbed by definitions. It searched for eternal forms. It moved from soil and wind to ideals and universals. Now, let us be clear. Abstraction is not the enemy. It is not evil to define, to summarize, to reason. The scriptures themselves invite us to reason. Come, let us reason together, says Yahweh in Isaiah. Paul, in the book of Acts, reasons with Jews and Gentiles alike. The Proverbs urge us to get wisdom, get understanding. But abstraction is not the language in which revelation came. The danger arises when the Greek root, human philosophy, categories, and systems, is allowed to redefine Yahweh's words. When the imagery of covenant, the concreteness of soil and breath, is swallowed up by lofty definitions that float above daily life. Let us pause and walk through some examples to feel the difference in our bones. Truth, emet, from the root amen, to be firm, to be steady. Think of a peg hammered into the wall, a foundation stone that will not shift. That is truth in Hebrew, something you can lean on without fear of collapse. Glory, kavod, from the root kaved, to be heavy, weighty. Glory is not a shining light in the distance. It is the heaviness of presence. The weight you feel when the chieftain enters the room or when Yahweh's presence fills the temple. Righteousness, tzedakah, from the root word tzedek, to be straight, to be aligned. Righteousness is like a plumb line held against a wall. It is like scales that balance evenly. It is a path that runs straight, not crooked. Spirit, ruach. At its root, ruach means wind, breath, moving air. It is what fills your lungs when you inhale. It is the storm wind that sweeps across the desert. Applied to Yahweh, it is his animating breath, his living presence moving through his people. Wisdom, chokmah, from the root chakam, to be skilled, experienced. Wisdom is not merely knowing, it is doing with skill. It is the craftsman cutting wood straight, the stone cutter shaping rock with precision, the sailor reading the waves with practiced eyes. Do you feel it? Every word carries weight. Every word ties itself to life, to touch, sight, sound, and practice. Now compare the Greek renderings. Truth became aletheia, unhiddenness, an abstract idea of reality beyond appearances. Glory became doxa, reputation, honor, shining majesty, detached from weight. Righteousness became dikaiosune, a virtue debated in Plato's Republic, defined in categories. Spirit became pneuma, which in philosophy became an immaterial essence, opposed to matter. Wisdom became Sophia, the intellectual pursuit of ultimate knowledge, the concrete peg, the heavy weight, the straight path, the breath of wind, the craftsman's skill. All of these were lifted into the sky and turned into abstract ideas. So what happened when the Hebrew scriptures and the teachings of Yeshua and the apostles entered the Greek-speaking world? Inevitably, teachers began to explain them in Greek categories. They used words like substance, essence, nature, form. They built systems of theology with philosophical scaffolding. Was that wrong? Not entirely. But it was dangerous, because the more Greek categories dominated, the more the concrete imagery of the scriptures was thinned out. The Hebrew way of speaking in story, image, and covenant was replaced by Greek systems of metaphysics and definition, and so theology often floated free of the soil, no longer tented in the earth, but climbing ladders of thought into the sky of ideas. The point is not to reject abstraction outright. It can be a tool. It can help us summarize, systematize, and compare. But it must never replace the imagery Yahweh gave us. Scripture came to us in a language of images. It was Yahweh breathed in covenantal pictures. The altar smoke rising, the desert wind sweeping, the shepherd leading his flock, the scales balancing fairly, the craftsman working with skill. This is the language of revelation. To trade it for philosophical categories is to uproot a tree from its soil and try to plant it in the clouds. So what does this mean for us? It means that when we open the scriptures, we must return to the Hebrew roots. When you read truth, don't imagine an abstract idea in the sky. See the peg hammered into the wall, the stone foundation under your feet. When you read glory, don't imagine mere shining majesty. Feel the heaviness of presence, the weight of Yahweh pressing near. When you read righteousness, don't picture a category of virtue. Walk the straight path. Hold the scales that balance evenly. When you read spirit, don't drift into disembodied substance. Breathe deep. Feel the wind rushing through the tent, the storm sweeping across the land. When you read wisdom, don't reduce it to clever ideas. Watch the craftsman at work. See the sailor reading the sea. Feel the skill of hands guided by practice. This is how the Hebrews spoke. This is how Yahweh revealed himself. Abstraction and concrete thought are not enemies. They are two routes to meaning. One climbs by definitions, the other walks a path of images, but only one was chosen as the language of revelation. And that was the Hebrew way, the way of story, covenant, and image. So let abstraction serve, but let it never rule. Let categories clarify, but let them never redefine. Let the images remain at the center, for they are Yahweh breathed. Truth is not a floating idea. It is a peg that holds. Glory is not an abstract majesty. It is the weight of presence. Righteousness is not a category of virtue. It is the path that runs straight. Spirit is not an invisible essence. It is breath in the lungs, wind in the desert. Wisdom is not mere philosophy. It is skill, practice, and life lived well. This is the language of Scripture.